Every person who is struggling financially right now believes the same thing. They believe the problem is that they are not doing enough, not working hard enough, not waking up early enough, not filling their hours tightly enough. They believe that if they could just become more productive, more disciplined, more relentless with their time, the money would finally follow. They are wrong. Not slightly wrong, structurally wrong, wrong in a way that has compounded quietly against them for years. Here is what no one has said plainly enough for you to actually hear it. The behaviors you were told would make you wealthy are the exact behaviors keeping wealth at a distance. The calendar full of tasks, the inbox at zero, the 15-hour days you wear like proof of seriousness. These are not wealth-building activities. They are wealth-replacing activities. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a life that accumulates and a life that merely continues. Think about the hardest working people you have ever known, not the most successful, the hardest working. Hands rough, schedule full, never a moment wasted. Now think about what their financial life actually looked like. The pattern is not accidental. There is a reason for it, a precise, structural, economic reason. It has nothing to do with their character, their discipline, or how much they deserved better. It has to do with a system they were never shown, a belief they were handed young and never questioned. By the time this ends, you will see that system clearly. And once you see it, the life you have been working so hard to earn will finally start to make sense, not as a reward for effort, but as something built on an entirely different foundation. Chapter 1. Hard workers die broke for a reason. Every civilization that has ever risen and crumbled shared one belief above all others: work hard and life rewards you. It did not matter what language the people spoke, what gods they prayed to, or what they built their cities from. The belief was the same. Effort is virtue. Effort earns safety. Effort, given enough of it, earns everything. This idea is so old it feels like gravity. It feels like it could not possibly be wrong. And that is exactly why it has quietly cost so many people everything they worked for. You are not listening to this because your life is going perfectly. You are listening because somewhere between the effort you put in and the life you expected to have, something did not add up. What you are about to hear will not tell you to work less. It will tell you something stranger and more useful than that. It will tell you why the equation itself was broken before you ever agreed to it. Here is something that will sit with you. The people who work the most hours in any economy are almost never the people who hold the most wealth. That is not an opinion. Study the data on manual laborers, shift workers, small business owners grinding 60 and 70 hours a week, and you will find the same result everywhere you look. Extreme effort, thin accumulation. Meanwhile, the people sitting at the top of the net worth charts are not working more hours than you. Many of them are working fewer. This is not a coincidence. It is not luck. It is the result of two completely different economic systems operating at the same time in the same world. And most people do not even know both systems exist. You are probably living inside only one of them. The one you are living in has a name, even if nobody ever told you what to call it. Call it the wage economy. It is the system where your time produces your income. You show up, you perform, you get paid. The relationship is direct. 1 hour of effort produces 1 unit of compensation. Within this system, productivity is everything. Being productive means squeezing more output from each hour. It means never wasting a minute. It means answering the emails faster, finishing the project sooner, taking on extra responsibilities before anyone asks. Productivity inside the wage economy is the highest virtue there is, and you have been told your whole life that this virtue, practiced consistently, will build your wealth. It will not. That is the open wound this chapter is going to press on. It will take a few minutes before the full sting of it makes sense. Hold it. Do not let it go yet. Marcus was 41 years old when he sat across from his younger brother at a kitchen table and could not explain something. Marcus had worked since he was 16. Nights at a warehouse through high school, then a trade certification, then 15 years as a licensed electrician running his own small crew. He was good at what he did. Clients called him back. He returned every message within the hour. He took jobs others turned down because they were too complicated, too far out, or paid too little. If there was a badge for effort, Marcus had earned it 100 times over. His brother Daniel had spent his 20s differently. He had worked too, but less consistently. He spent a suspicious amount of time reading, thinking, talking to people in industries he did not yet belong to. He bought a small rental property at 28 with money borrowed from their mother and a partner he met at a community meeting. By the time they sat at that kitchen table, Daniel owned 4 units and a small commercial space. Marcus owned his truck, his tools, and a savings account that had not grown in 3 years. Marcus looked at his brother and said, "I work twice as hard as you." Daniel did not argue. He just said, "I know. That is what worries me." Think about that for a moment. Call up the season you were in at that point 3 years back as it really was. Not geographically. Think about where you were financially. Think about how many hours you worked in those 3 years. Think about how much of that work you would describe as productive. Getting things done. Checking boxes. Being useful and reliable and present. Now ask yourself honestly how much of that time moved you closer to the life you want. Not a better performance review, not a completed task list. Actual, durable, building something that lasts progress. If the answer is uncomfortable, that discomfort is important. It is data. Here is what most people do with that discomfort. They decide they need to be more productive. They find a new system, a better planner, a morning routine. They optimize. And for a brief period it feels like progress, because productivity has a feeling to it that is almost indistinguishable from forward motion. But the feeling is not the motion. Being busy enough that you cannot think straight is not the same as building wealth. It is the opposite of it. Wealth requires thinking. It requires noticing. It requires the kind of slow, patient attention that is impossible when every minute is already allocated. There is something worth naming here. Call it the busy badge. You know exactly what it is because you have worn it. You have probably been proud of it. The busy badge is the way people signal their value through their exhaustion. I have been absolutely slammed. I have not had a day off in 3 weeks. I am running on 4 hours of sleep. These are not complaints in the way they sound. They are status claims. They are saying, look at what I am willing to sacrifice. Look at how seriously I take this. Look at how worthy I am. And the people around you nod. They respect it. They might even envy it. Because in the wage economy, the busy badge is real currency. Outside the wage economy, it is almost worthless. What nobody warns you about is that the busy badge has a cost that does not appear on any invoice. Every hour you are performing busyness is an hour you are not thinking about leverage. Every week you are maxed out and proud of it is a week you are not building anything that will work without you. The wage economy rewards your presence. The wealth economy rewards your absence. Those are not refinements of each other. They are contradictions. And here is the key that most productivity advice will never hand you. Productivity is a tool designed for the wage economy. It was built to help you perform better inside a system that pays you for time. It will make you more valuable in that system. It will earn you more within that system's ceiling. But the ceiling does not move, no matter how productive you become. You cannot productivity your way out of a wage economy. The math does not allow it. There are only so many hours. There is only so much output one person can generate. And there is a hard upper limit on what any market will pay for one person's time, no matter how skilled or efficient that person becomes. Wealth does not live at the ceiling of the wage economy. Wealth lives in an entirely different room. The people in that room are not smarter than you. Some of them started with less than you had. What they understood early, or were lucky enough to stumble into, or were told directly by someone who had already crossed over, is that the two systems require completely different behaviors. What makes you excellent in the wage economy, specifically the constant output, the full calendar, the pride in exhaustion, actively disqualifies you from building inside the wealth economy. Because the wealth economy runs on leverage, and leverage requires space, attention, and time that is not already allocated. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about working smarter versus working harder that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it immediately changes how you act every single morning. But right now, stay with this. You were handed the wage economy the day you started school. Every reward you received before the age of 18 was a reward for performance, finishing the work, completing the test, meeting the standard, and then exceeding it. You learned that effort plus output equals reward, and you are not wrong that it equals reward. You are just wrong about what kind of reward and how far that reward can take you. It takes you to a very respectable ceiling, and then it holds you there firmly, while you work harder trying to push through something that does not have a door. Marcus is still doing good work. He is skilled and trusted, and his clients are loyal. He is not failing by any visible measure. But 3 years from now, his financial life will look almost identical to how it looks today, unless he stops confusing excellent performance with wealth creation. Those two things share vocabulary. They share a feeling, but they are not the same thing, and treating them as the same thing is the most expensive mistake a hard-working person can make. Productivity is how you earn inside the wage economy. It has no native mechanism for building wealth. None. It was not designed for that. Using it as your primary financial strategy is like using a hammer to dig a well. You are working. You are working hard. The tool just was not made for this job. The question is not how to work harder. The question is whether you are building anything that works when you stop. Chapter 2. Your calendar is a poverty map. Most people who are building wealth have open space on their calendar. You already know that is not how your story goes. You have been told your whole life that a full schedule means you are serious, disciplined, committed. That the person with back-to-back meetings and 17 open tabs is the person who is going to make it. That belief is wrong, not slightly misaligned, not missing a nuance. Structurally, quietly, invisibly wrong. And the cost of holding it is not just stress or exhaustion. The cost is your financial future, bleeding out one booked hour at a time. Here is the question that should sit in your mind for the next few minutes. If your calendar is completely full, where exactly is the wealth supposed to come from? Hold that question. The answer is coming, but it needs to be earned. Bring to mind the season you were in at that point 3 years back as it really was. What did your week look like? Were you already proud of how busy you were? Did you wear that busyness like a badge, proof that you were in the game, proof you were not lazy, proof you belonged in the conversation about success? Now look at where you are today. Has the fullness of your calendar translated into a different financial reality? Or has it mostly translated into a fuller calendar? That is not an accusation. It is a mirror. Dana was 31 years old and earning more money than anyone in her family ever had. Her title was impressive. Her apartment was clean and modern. She had a gym membership she used 4 mornings a week, a planner she filled every Sunday night, and a reputation at work for being the person who got things done. If you had seen her schedule, you would have nodded in respect. Every block of her day had a purpose. She had eliminated waste. She was, by every visible measure, the picture of someone building a successful life. But Dana had no investments outside her company's retirement plan, which she had not logged into in 2 years. She had a savings account she had not grown in 8 months. Every raise had been absorbed by lifestyle and convenience. She had ideas, genuinely good ones, for a consulting arrangement based on her expertise. But she had never once turned those ideas into an action because the week was always already full before Sunday night was over. She was not lazy. She was not irresponsible. She was completely, comprehensively occupied. And occupied people do not build things. They maintain things. Dana is not unusual. Dana is the template. She is what the culture of productivity produces when it runs at full efficiency, a high-performing professional working at maximum capacity and building, net, almost nothing that will outlast the effort she puts in each week. The trap she is caught in has a name. It is called the time-for-money exchange. Every hour she works, she receives compensation. Every hour she does not work, she does not. The relationship is one-to-one, and it is a closed loop. There is no mechanism inside that loop for wealth to accumulate. Wealth does not accumulate through effort alone. Wealth accumulates through leverage, through arrangements where your earlier effort continues to produce return after the effort has stopped. You cannot build leverage inside a full calendar. That is not a motivational observation. It is a structural one. Leverage requires time you are not selling. It requires hours that are free enough and calm enough for you to do the kind of thinking, creating, connecting, and building that produces a return not this Friday but 6 months from now. When every available hour is already committed to producing income today, those hours do not exist. A full calendar is not evidence of ambition. A full calendar is evidence that every available unit of your most irreplaceable resource has already been spoken for. Think about what you are actually looking at when you open your weekly schedule. You are looking at a map, not a map of your progress, not a map of your discipline, a map of who owns your time and what you receive in exchange for it. A poverty map does not mean you are poor in income. It means your time has no unclaimed territory, no white space where something new could take root. Here is a concrete way to see it. Take 1 week from the last month, any week. Count the hours you spent directly trading your presence and attention for money. Count the meetings you could not skip, the shifts you had to cover, the deliverables that required you specifically in real time to exist. Now count the hours you spent doing something that could produce a return without your continued presence, something that keeps working when you stop. Most people, when they do this honestly, discover the ratio is overwhelming in one direction. That ratio is the leverage gap. The leverage gap is not a failure of intelligence. It is not a failure of character. It is a natural consequence of a calendar built around income today rather than wealth later. Income and wealth are not the same thing. They do not grow from the same soil. Income grows from showing up. Wealth grows from what you build while you are not showing up, from what grows while you sleep, from decisions you made before this week even began. The previous chapter asked whether you are building anything that works when you stop. Your calendar is where you answer that question in practice, not in theory. You can believe in leverage philosophically. You can find it interesting. You can save articles about passive income and read books about financial freedom. But if your calendar remains completely spoken for, those beliefs never touch your actual life. They stay in the category of things you agree with, not things you act on. Conviction without capacity is just decoration. Now consider what Dana's story actually illustrates, not as a cautionary tale about overwork, but as a precise diagnosis. The problem is not that Dana works hard. The problem is that her calendar was designed, consciously or not, to produce income without ever building the conditions for income to stop being necessary. Every optimization she made, every blocked-off deep work session, every eliminated distraction, every early morning was pointed at being better at the existing exchange, not at changing the terms of the exchange itself. In a later section, you will come to a point about free time and what it is actually for that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it immediately changes how you schedule every week going forward. But for now, stay with the structure of the problem. A calendar built entirely around productivity is a calendar built entirely around someone else's definition of your value. Your employer, your clients, your customers, they need your time to be full because your full time is what they are buying. The structure that benefits them is not automatically the structure that benefits you. When you accepted the cultural equation that a full schedule equals a serious person, you accepted their frame. You let them define what financial worthiness looks like on a Tuesday afternoon. Serious people do not have nothing to do. That is what you were taught. But look more carefully at people who have actually built financial independence, not people who earn impressively, but people who have built something that generates return independent of their weekly effort. Their schedules often have a quality that would make a productivity coach uneasy. They have gaps, not because they are lazy, because they made the gaps on purpose. White space is not wasted time. White space is where leverage gets built. The open loop you have been carrying since the first paragraph deserves its close now. You asked where the wealth is supposed to come from if the calendar is full. The answer is, it cannot come from there. Not because you are not working hard enough inside that calendar, you probably are, but because a calendar with no unspoken hours has no room for the kind of work that compounds. It has no room for the call you make speculatively, the idea you develop slowly, the asset you build in installments. Those things require time that has not already been sold. Dana, by the end of her story, did not quit her job. She did not move to a remote island. She did two things. She stopped treating her open hours as schedule failures to be fixed, and she started treating them as the only hours in her week where anything lasting could begin. The result was not immediate. It was not dramatic in the short term, but it was the first time in 4 years that her week contained something that was not simply maintaining what already existed. She stopped confusing a full calendar with a full life. So here is what this chapter is actually asking you to sit with, not as a vague philosophical question, but as a practical, specific challenge. Pull up your calendar for last week. Find every hour that was not already spoken for by income-producing activity. Now ask yourself what happened in those hours. Did you protect them? Did you fill them? Did you let them disappear into small tasks and small distractions that felt productive but produced nothing that will still be working for you next year? The question is not whether you are busy. You are busy. That is not in dispute. The question is what a wealth calendar would look like and whether you have ever actually built one. Chapter 3. Productivity was designed for employees. Every productivity system you have ever used was built to make someone else rich. That sounds like a conspiracy theory. You might want to dismiss it the same way you dismiss things that feel too uncomfortable to sit with. Do not dismiss it. When you trace the history of productivity, not the Instagram version, not the self-help version, but the actual origin, you find a factory floor, a stopwatch, and a man who was not optimizing your life. He was optimizing your output for someone who was paying you by the hour. The entire architecture of how you think about getting things done was designed inside a system where your time belongs to someone else. Here is the tension that should stop you cold. If you are using that same architecture to try to build wealth, you are running factory software on a problem that requires something else entirely. That contradiction has a cost. This chapter is about what that cost actually looks like, and why the most efficient version of your current system might be the most dangerous place you ever settle. Here is the open question worth sitting with from the start. Why do people who work harder than almost anyone they know still end up with very little to show for it after a decade? Hold that question. The answer is not what most people assume, and it will not arrive for a few minutes yet. Frederick Winslow Taylor studied workers the way a mechanic studies an engine. He watched them, timed them, broke their movements into individual components, and then told them exactly how to move their hands. The goal was to extract the maximum number of finished products per paid hour. This was the 1800s. Taylor called it scientific management. He published a book in 1911 that became required reading for industrial companies across America and Europe. His central belief was simple. Every task has one best method. Find it, standardize it, train every worker to follow it, and output goes up while cost per unit goes down. That is the DNA of every productivity system you have ever downloaded. GTD, getting things done, is Taylor in a nicer jacket. The Pomodoro technique is Taylor with a kitchen timer. The time-blocking schedules celebrated in productivity newsletters are Taylor's workflow charts rebranded for knowledge workers. The vocabulary changed. The logic did not. The logic is always the same. Identify the task, reduce friction, complete more units in less time, repeat. Now ask yourself who benefits when you complete more units in less time. If you are an employee, completing more units makes your employer's operation more efficient. It might earn you a raise. It might earn you a promotion. It probably earns you more responsibility, which means more tasks, which means you need an even better productivity system to manage the new load. And on it goes. The system was not designed to help you escape the system. It was designed to make you more valuable inside it. Move back 3 years and look clearly, not emotionally, not philosophically, but practically. How many tasks did you complete each week? How many items crossed off the list? How many projects finished? How many obligations met? Now think about how much closer to financial independence you are today compared to then. If the distance between those two numbers feels uncomfortable, that discomfort is pointing at something real. Completing tasks is not the same thing as building assets. Moving fast inside a fixed-wage model does not shrink the model. It makes the model run better. This is where most people get stuck in a thought that feels almost offensive to consider. What if being more productive has actually made your situation harder to escape? Not because productivity is bad in some abstract sense, but because every hour you spent optimizing your output was an hour not spent thinking about ownership, leverage, or what your time would be worth if it were not traded directly for a dollar amount. The efficient version of a trap is still a trap. It is just one you are more comfortable in. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Marcus was 29 and worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company. He was, by every measurable standard, excellent at his job. He read every book about productivity he could find. He had a color-coded task management system. He processed his inbox to zero every evening. He tracked his deep work hours in a spreadsheet. He almost never missed a deadline. His managers loved him. He got raises, modest ones, steady ones, the kind that kept him feeling like progress was happening. One Thursday afternoon, his colleague Dana came back from a 2-week vacation. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she had spent part of the trip reviewing a small rental property she had purchased 18 months earlier. The property had appreciated by more than Marcus's annual raise. In 2 weeks, while she was on vacation, Marcus sat with that for a long time. He was not less intelligent than Dana. He was not less disciplined. He was, by his own measurement, more organized. But Dana had been thinking about a different problem. Dana had not been asking how to complete more tasks. She had been asking how to own something that produced value without requiring her presence. The gap between those two questions was the gap between where Marcus was and where Dana was headed. Marcus went home that night and opened his task management app. He stared at the color-coded columns, the inbox, the recurring reminders. For the first time, he noticed that almost nothing in that system was connected to ownership. Every single task pointed back to his job. The most efficient version of his life was entirely organized around making someone else's operation run smoothly. He had built a perfect machine for staying exactly where he was. That is the thing about Taylor's legacy. It is invisible. You do not feel it as a constraint because it looks like discipline. It looks like the thing that separates people who succeed from people who do not. And in the narrow context of employment, it does. But there is a wider context. Inside that wider context, the question is never how efficiently you traded your time. The question is whether you traded it at all. Now settle the question that has been open since the beginning of this section. Why do people who work harder than almost anyone they know still end up with very little after a decade? Because they optimized a time-for-money equation. They got better and better at an exchange that was never going to produce wealth by itself. Hours times rate, no matter how high the rate climbs, is still a multiplication problem with a ceiling. Assets compound. Hours do not. The leverage gap is what separates those two outcomes. Leverage, in the way it matters here, means your financial results grow larger than your time input. A business system that runs without you present. A piece of property that rises in value while you sleep. An investment that earns returns while you are doing something else. None of those things show up in a task manager. None of them are optimized by a Pomodoro timer. They require a different category of thinking altogether. Not how to do more, how to own more. Here is what makes this particularly sharp to sit with. The cultural story around productivity is not neutral. It carries a moral weight that has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with identity. You were taught, probably quite early, that hard work is virtuous, that a full schedule means you are serious. That busyness signals importance. That if you just stayed disciplined and efficient long enough, the results would come. That story is not a lie exactly. It is just incomplete in a way that costs you time you cannot get back. The busy badge, the feeling of being maximally booked, maximally productive, maximally organized, has become a substitute for a different kind of signal. The signal that would mean something over a decade is not how much you finished. It is what you own. It is what earns without you. It is whether your financial life is growing through leverage or just surviving through labor. Busyness and wealth are not the same destination. Sometimes they are opposite directions. Before long, you will come to a point about free time that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it immediately changes how you decide to spend your least structured hours. For now, here is the practical edge of what this chapter is pointing at. If you built a calendar this week and filled it only with what creates assets, not what fulfills obligations, how many hours would be in it? How many of your current tasks are optimizing your labor, and how many are building something that earns independently of you? Most people who sit with that question honestly find that the ratio is startling. Not because they are lazy. Because they were handed a system built for a different goal and told it was universal. Taylor built his system for the factory. The factory needed workers who were faster and more consistent. The factory did not need workers who were accumulating equity. Those were two separate categories of people, and the system only ever served one of them. You have been handed that system and told it is the path to financial success. It is the path to financial reliability, to staying employed, to being valued, to earning incremental raises inside a structure someone else built. That is not nothing, but it is also not the same as wealth. Confusing the two is a mistake that compounds quietly for years before it becomes impossible to ignore. The most productive version of your current life might be the clearest evidence that you need a different system entirely. Chapter 4. Wealth doesn't reward the fastest worker. Right now, while you are listening to this, money is moving. It is moving toward people who are not working any harder than you. Some of them are asleep. Some are on a beach somewhere, checking a single number on a phone screen and then putting it down. That movement is not happening because those people are smarter or more disciplined or more deserving. It is happening because of a specific mechanism, one that has almost nothing to do with effort and everything to do with structure. Every hour you spend working faster, producing more, grinding through the list, is an hour you are not spending building that structure. And that gap does not stay the same size. It widens. Each day adds to it. The wealth you are not building right now is not just this month's difference. It is the compounding it would have become. It is the options it would have bought you 5 years from now. This chapter is about that mechanism. Once you see it clearly, the way you look at your own time will never be quite the same. Think about what the last chapter left you with. The most productive version of your current life might be the clearest evidence that you need a different system entirely. That sentence was not meant to discourage you. It was meant to point somewhere. And this is where it points. Here is a question worth holding for a moment. What exactly is the thing that wealthy people have that productive people do not? Not attitude, not morning routines, something structural, something that functions differently at a mechanical level. Hold that question. The answer is coming. But before you can receive it properly, you need to feel the full shape of the problem. There is a word that sounds almost identical to wealth. It sounds like success. It sounds like progress. The word is busy. You have been taught, probably since childhood, that busy equals valuable. The person who stays late is dedicated. The person with the packed schedule is important. The person who has no time is the person who is in demand. These are not lies exactly. They are just incomplete in a way that costs you enormously. Busy is a description of your input. Wealth is a function of your output relative to your time. And those two things can move in completely opposite directions at once. Dana learned this the hard way. She was 31, working as a freelance graphic designer, and she was, by every visible measure, killing it. She had more clients than she could comfortably handle. She was booked 6 weeks out. She raised her rates twice in 1 year and people still called. Her income had grown from $22,000 annually to $68,000. She was proud of that number in the way you are proud of something you clawed out of the ground yourself. But Dana had hit something. Not a wall exactly. More like a ceiling made of glass. The kind you cannot see until your forehead is pressed against it. She was working 50, sometimes 55 hours a week. She had no time to take on new clients, no time to think about anything other than the next deadline. When she did the math one Sunday afternoon, sitting at a table covered in coffee cups and half-finished invoices, she realized something. Her hourly rate divided across her actual working hours was lower than it had been 2 years earlier when she charged less. More clients, more output, less money per hour. She was more productive than she had ever been in her life, and she was further from wealth than the numbers made it look. What Dana was experiencing has a name. It is called the productivity ceiling, and it is not a personal failure. It is the natural, inevitable limit of any system built entirely on personal effort. Here is the mechanical truth of it. When your income is tied one-to-one to your hours, your maximum earning potential is capped at one number. The total hours in your life multiplied by your rate. You can raise the rate. You can fill the hours more efficiently, but you cannot break through the cap without changing the structure. You cannot get to the other side of the ceiling by jumping higher inside the same room. Wealthy people are not in that room. This is worth examining carefully. Not just Dana's situation, but the difference between two things that look nearly identical from the outside. Picture a vending machine. It sits in a hospital corridor, stocked with snacks and drinks and little packets of crackers. Nobody is standing next to it. Nobody is waiting tables or taking orders or clocking in. At 2 in the morning, when the corridor is empty except for one tired nurse walking to the coffee station, that machine sells a bag of chips. Money moves. No human effort was expended in that moment. Now picture a waiter in a restaurant, good at the job, fast, attentive, personable. He carries plates, remembers orders, refills glasses without being asked. When the restaurant is full, he earns well. When it is closed, he earns nothing. When he is sick, he earns nothing. His income is a direct and exclusive product of his physical presence and his time. Both serve food. One sleeps. That is not a metaphor about laziness. The vending machine required enormous effort to build, stock, negotiate placement for, and maintain. Somebody worked very hard on that system. The difference is when the work happened and how it compounds afterward. The waiter works and immediately earns. The vending machine owner worked earlier and earns continuously. This is leverage, not a complicated word, not a finance world abstraction. Just this. You do work once and it produces returns more than once. That is the whole idea. And it is the single biggest structural difference between people who trade hours for income and people who build wealth. Now here is where most productivity advice goes wrong. This is the part worth really sitting with. Productivity culture tells you to do more in less time, batch your tasks, use the right tools, build better habits, wake up earlier. These things are not useless, but they are all optimizations inside the same room. They make you a faster waiter. They do not move you toward building the vending machine. The ceiling of productivity is one person's maximum hours. That number is fixed. 24 in a day, roughly 16 you can use, fewer you can sustain. No amount of efficiency changes the ceiling. You can squeeze closer to it, but you cannot move it. The ceiling of leverage is theoretically unlimited. One person's idea, built into a product, can sell to one person or 1 million. One piece of writing, one course, one investment, one system, can earn while you are doing something else entirely. The return is not tied to your presence. And that asymmetry, that fundamental difference in how returns scale, is the mechanism behind almost every significant wealth story you have ever heard. Go back to the season you were in at that point 3 years back as it really was. The income you had, the hours you were working, the ratio between the two. Now think about today. Has that ratio changed in your favor? Are you earning meaningfully more per hour of your life, or are you simply earning more because you are working more? Be honest with yourself for a second. That ratio is the real number, not the gross income on your tax return, the return per hour of your finite life. If the ratio has stayed flat or gotten worse, you are not behind because you are not working hard enough. You are behind because the structure has not changed. And structures do not change by accident. Dana eventually made a shift, not a dramatic one. She did not quit her clients overnight. What she did was spend 4 hours on a Sunday creating a brand identity template pack, a set of files a small business owner could purchase and use themselves for logo and color work. She priced it at $67. The first month she sold 9 of them. $603 for 4 hours of one-time work. Not life-changing, but here is what changed for Dana. That Sunday afternoon, she was not trading those 4 hours for money. She was building a machine, a small one, a quiet one, but a machine. Over the following 8 months, those templates sold consistently with no additional work on her part. She added a second pack, then a third. Inside of a year, the templates were generating roughly $1,100 a month. Not enough to replace her client work, but enough to prove something to herself about how earning could actually function. The money was not the revelation. The revelation was structural. She had built something that worked without her being present. And once you feel that, once you know that feeling, it changes what questions you ask. You stop asking, how do I get more clients, and start asking, what can I build that does not need me standing next to it? This is the question that separates the productive from the wealthy. Not who works harder, not who is more disciplined, who is building systems that earn independent of their presence. Here is the thing about Dana's story that is easy to miss. She was not less busy after she built the templates. For a while, she was busier. Building a machine takes work. The difference is not in how much you work during the building phase. The difference is in what you have when the building is done. A waiter who works hard finishes a shift and has nothing left running. A person who builds a leveraged system finishes a phase and has something that continues. That is not magic. It is structure. Now, back to the question from the beginning of this chapter. What exactly is the thing that wealthy people have that productive people do not? You can feel the answer forming now. It is not energy. It is not luck. It is not a particular talent. It is systems that produce returns without requiring a one-to-one exchange of time. Ownership of those systems, leverage embedded in them. And returns that are asymmetric, meaning the effort required to earn the next dollar does not increase proportionally with each dollar earned. In fact, often it decreases. No amount of productivity hacks deliver that. Faster, better, more disciplined, all of it runs into the same ceiling. The ceiling of you. Down the line in this book, you will come to a point about passive income that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it immediately changes how you decide to spend the next available hour of your life. But for now, stay with this. Every hour spent getting faster is an hour not spent building something that runs without you. Both feel like progress. Only one of them is. The question the next chapter answers is this. If leverage is the mechanism, why do so many people who understand it never actually build it? Chapter 5. The Identity Tax on Every Promotion. Being good at your job is one of the most reliable ways to stay poor. That sounds like an excuse people make for mediocrity. It is not. It is a description of a specific mechanism. A tax you pay every time your employer recognizes your value. A tax that is invisible on your pay stub but shows up in the compounding gap between your net worth and the net worth of people who were never quite as impressive at 28 as you were. Here is the question nobody asks when the promotion email arrives. What does accepting this make you? Not what does it pay you? Not what does it do for your title? What does it make you, at the level of identity, at the level of who you believe yourself to be, and more importantly, who you believe you must keep being? The answer to that question is what this chapter is about, and the answer costs more than most promotions are worth. Remember the season you were in at that point 3 years back as it really was. The role, the salary, the daily rhythm, the way you described yourself to people at a dinner party. Think about how much of what you believed about yourself then was tied to how hard you were working, how capable your colleagues thought you were, how many things depended on you showing up. Now ask yourself, has that grip loosened or has it tightened? If you have been promoted even once in the last 3 years, it has tightened. That is not a moral failing, it is physics. There is a woman named Dana. She is 31 and she is exceptional at what she does. She started as an analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm at 24. By 27, she was the person her team called when things broke. Not because she was the loudest, because she was the one who stayed, figured it out, and delivered. Her manager noticed. Her manager's manager noticed. By 29, Dana had a new title, 4 direct reports, and a salary that felt like validation because it was. The number on her paycheck confirmed what she had suspected about herself since college. She was worth it. She had proved it. At 31, Dana gets another promotion. Senior Director. Her salary crosses into territory that makes her parents say things like, "We're so proud of you," with a specific kind of relief in their voice. She gets a bigger apartment. She starts thinking about a car upgrade. And she keeps a quiet list in her phone of things she wants to do: invest more, build something on the side, eventually stop trading every Monday for a Friday. But the list stops growing because Dana is busy. Dana is important. Dana is needed. And Dana, without realizing it, has just paid the highest invoice of her career. Here is what the invoice contains. Not the hours. Everyone expects the hours to increase. The invoice contains something far more permanent. It contains the story Dana now tells herself about who she is. Senior Director is not just a title. It is an identity. It is a set of behaviors she must perform to be consistent with that identity. It is a set of relationships, her team, her peers, her company, that now depend on her continuing to be the person who got the promotion. And departing from that identity, even for a few hours a week to build something that belongs to her, feels like betrayal, feels like irresponsibility, feels, if she is honest, like not being Dana anymore. That feeling is the tax, the leverage gap, The distance between what your hours produce for you and what your hours could produce if they were spent building something that works when you are not. That gap does not close by accident. It closes by choice. But you can only make that choice if the story you tell yourself allows for it. Dana's story no longer does. Every promotion has narrowed the set of choices that feel available to her. Not because her employer controls her, because she does. Now here is the open loop this chapter is working toward. If you understand the leverage gap, and you do because the previous chapters named it, why have so many people who understand it never actually built it? The answer is not laziness. It is not a lack of information. People who understand leverage and still fail to build it share one common trait. Hold that question. The answer is coming, but it requires building something first. What Dana is experiencing has a name in psychology: identity consistency. People do not resist change because they are comfortable. They resist change because they have a coherent self-story, and change threatens the coherence. The more successful you become in a traditional career, the more coherent your self-story becomes around that career. Every promotion adds another chapter to the story. Every raise is another citation. Every performance review that says exceeds expectations is another sentence that makes you more yourself and more locked in. This is why the promotion is not just a financial event. It is an identity reinforcement event. It tells you with institutional authority that the thing you have been doing is correct, that the way you have been spending your time is the right way, that the trade, your hours for a salary, is a trade worth making and worth making more of. But here is what the institution cannot see and will never tell you. The trade that gets you from $60,000 a year to 90 is the same trade that keeps you from ever building the thing that earns while you sleep. Not because you cannot do both. Because the identity that the promotion cements makes the second thing feel dangerous. Not financially dangerous, morally dangerous. Like you would be cheating on who you are. That is the specific mechanism, not time scarcity, identity rigidity. Think about a doctor who is brilliant. She spends a decade becoming the best diagnostician in her department. Her patients trust her. Her colleagues admire her. And then someone suggests she could write about what she knows, build something that teaches, that scales, that reaches 100,000 people instead of the 40 she sees each week. She will say, with genuine conviction, that she did not become a doctor to create content. What she means is that the identity does not permit it. The identity was built in a particular shape, and anything that does not fit that shape feels like a betrayal of the real her. The real her. That phrase does the most damage because it feels so authentic. The truth is that the real her is a story she has been telling for 15 years, reinforced by every success, every credential, every nod of approval from someone she respected. The story is not wrong. It is just incomplete. And an incomplete story told often enough forecloses the chapters that were never written. You have a version of this story. Everyone listening does. The specifics are different: the title, the industry, the salary number that felt like a rival, but the structure is identical. You got better at something. You got rewarded for being better. The reward made getting better feel like the strategy. And now the strategy owns you and you call it purpose. Here is where hope enters, and it enters through a specific door. The identity tax is real, but it is not a life sentence. What makes it feel permanent is that no one names it. You cannot renegotiate a tax you do not know you are paying. The moment you name the mechanism, the moment you see that your resistance to building leverage is not a personality trait, but a story under pressure from a decade of institutional approval, the mechanism loses some of its grip. Not all of it, Some. And some is enough to start. There is something that happens when people realize their identity has been partly constructed by external validation rather than internal choice. There is a specific kind of grief in it. Because the achievements were real, the effort was real, the pride was real. And there is also a specific kind of freedom. Because a story that was written by external events can be written differently. The promotion does not define you unless you let it be the last word. Back to Dana. She still has the title. She still earns the salary. She has not quit. What changes is a question she starts asking before she makes decisions. The question is this consistent with who I have been, or is this consistent with who I am building toward? Those two things can overlap, but they are not the same question. The first one is a vote for the past. The second one is a vote for the leverage gap closing. Dana starts 1 hour earlier, 2 days a week, not to work for her employer. To work on something that could eventually not need her. She is terrible at it for months. She is slow, uncertain, and the work does not have the satisfying closure of her day job. But she is also no longer paying the full identity tax. She has introduced a second story. A competing narrative. And competing narratives, once started, tend to grow. Now that open loop closes here. The people who understand leverage and still never build it, they share one trait. They have invested too much in the identity that a productive career produces to risk the identity that building leverage requires. Because building leverage means being a beginner again, means being uncertain, slow, and not excellent for a season. And for someone whose worth has been tied to being excellent at something since their first performance review, being a beginner is not just uncomfortable. It is an existential threat. The way through that threat is not motivation. It is not a weekend seminar. It is the recognition that your identity was never the achievement. It was always the choosing. A little later, we turn toward an argument about how income grows that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it changes what you are willing to do on a Tuesday morning before your employer needs you. For now, carry this one thing forward. The promotion gave you more money and less freedom. And the freedom it took was the kind you cannot invoice. It was the freedom to see yourself as someone other than the person who earns the promotion. That is not an argument against ambition. It is an argument against letting someone else's definition of your value become your definition of yourself. The tax is real, but taxes, when named, can sometimes be refused. Chapter 6. Busyness is a wealth avoidance strategy. Something is being taken from you right now in this exact hour. Not by a person, not by bad luck, by the structure of your own day. Every hour you spend doing more things instead of the right things is an hour compounding against you. Not dramatically, not with a warning sign. Quietly at the end of a long Tuesday, when you close your laptop feeling tired and useful and still somehow behind. The loss is not the hour itself. The loss is what that hour could have been pointed at. The investment account you have not opened. The strategy conversation you keep postponing. The one financial decision that would have paid you in your sleep for the next decade. That decision is still waiting. It has been waiting for months, maybe years. And the invisible mechanism keeping you away from it is not laziness. It is not fear, exactly. It is the busyness you have chosen instead. This chapter is about why that busyness feels so good and what it is actually costing you. The previous chapter left you with something important. The idea that certain taxes on your time and wealth can, once named, be refused. This is the place where that refusal gets harder than it sounds, because this particular tax does not feel like a tax. It feels like virtue. You have probably heard the word productivity so many times it has lost its edges. It has become a feeling more than a definition. And the feeling it produces is this: I am working, therefore I am building. I am busy, therefore I am progressing. That feeling is one of the most expensive illusions available to someone who wants to build wealth. Because productivity, as the culture has sold it to you, and wealth building are not the same activity. They share almost nothing except the sensation of effort. Here is something researchers have found that most people never apply to their own lives. When the human brain faces a decision that carries genuine uncertainty and genuine identity weight, it will almost always choose a cleaner task instead. Any cleaner task. A task with clear inputs and clear outputs. A task that produces the sensation of completion. Not because the brain is broken, because uncertainty is metabolically expensive. The brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It conserves energy by avoiding open-ended problems with no guaranteed resolution. Deciding how to invest $500 a month is an open-ended problem. Returning 47 emails is not. That is the engine underneath what psychologists sometimes call productive procrastination. You are not avoiding work. You are doing work, real work, legitimate work, work that needs to be done. But you are doing it instead of the one kind of work that directly builds your financial position. And because the work you are doing is real, you never have to face the moment of choosing. You never have to sit in the uncomfortable room where your current financial identity and your desired financial identity look each other in the eye. Think about the last 3 months, not in vague terms. Think about a specific week. A week where your to-do list was full and you crossed most of it off, and you ended Friday with that particular tired satisfaction of someone who earned their rest. Now ask yourself this. In that week, did you move your actual financial position forward in any concrete way? Did you set something up, automate something, decide something, learn something that will pay you later without your presence? Or did you execute beautifully on things that reset the following Monday? That question is the mirror moment of this chapter. Sit with it. Most people, when they sit honestly with that question, find the answer uncomfortable. Not because they were lazy, because they were busy. Completely, genuinely, productively busy. And that busyness absorbed every hour that might otherwise have forced a reckoning. There is a woman named Dara. She ran the operations side of a small logistics company. Organized, capable, the person everyone leaned on. She worked 60-hour weeks and meant every hour of them. Her desk was clean. Her inboxes were managed. She had systems for everything that could be systematized. And she had no investment account, no financial strategy, and a savings balance that had barely moved in 4 years. Not because she lacked money. She was earning well, not because she lacked intelligence. Her intelligence was exactly why her work was so satisfying to do. The work responded to her. She acted and the work changed. She solved something and the problem was gone. Wealth building did not respond that way. She would open a brokerage account, face a page full of options, feel a quiet panic she could not name, and close the tab. Within 20 minutes she would be back on something she was good at, back on something that moved when she pushed it, back on something that told her hourly that she was enough. 4 years of that. 4 years of excellent execution on tasks that built the company she worked for. And the question she never quite let herself ask was this: who was compounding? Notice what is not being said here. This is not an argument that Dara was wrong to work hard. It is an argument that her hard work was functioning as something extra, something she did not authorize. It was functioning as a wall between her and a version of herself she found frightening to imagine. That is the real mechanism. not procrastination in the casual sense, not simple avoidance, something more specific. Busyness as a defense against an identity leap. Further on, we turn toward an argument about motivation and financial change that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it changes how you act. For now, stay with this idea of identity, because this is where the cost is actually located. The cognitive load research points to something important. Humans do not resist financial decisions primarily because the decisions are complex. They resist them because financial decisions carry a self-image cost that task completion does not. When you execute a work task perfectly, your identity is confirmed. You are competent. You are valuable. You are the person who gets things done. When you sit down to make a serious wealth decision, none of those identities are available to you. You are instead the person who might choose wrong, who might not know enough, who might, by making the decision, reveal that they have waited too long and the gap is larger than they have admitted to themselves. That revelation is what the busyness is protecting you from. Busy, productive, and wealthy are three completely different relationships to time. The busy person fills time with tasks. The productive person completes tasks that matter to their role. The wealthy person, or the person building toward wealth, does something different. They invest time in decisions and positions that continue working after the time is spent. The leverage gap, the distance between what your hours earn directly and what your decisions could earn indirectly, does not close through more execution. It closes through a different kind of action entirely. An action that feels less immediate, less satisfying, and far more exposing, which is exactly why execution is such a perfect substitute for it. You might have been wondering from the first minutes of this chapter whether the solution is simply a new habit, a calendar block, 30 minutes a week for financial review. That answer is not wrong. Habits help. Structure helps. But the habit most people build is still a way of managing the discomfort rather than resolving it. They schedule the 30 minutes. They sit in it. They feel the discomfort of not knowing what to do, and they fill the time with research that has no end point. Reading about index funds for the 40th time. Watching one more video about real estate. Building a spreadsheet that models a decision they never actually make. The discomfort is not resolved by more information. It is resolved by recognizing that the identity holding you back is not your true ceiling. It is a story you adopted at some point, probably early, about the kind of person who thinks about money versus the kind of person you are supposed to be. You were told, implicitly or directly, that people who care about money are cold, or greedy, or something separate from a person of genuine value. That the honest path was to work hard and trust that the rewards would follow. That strategy and wealth thinking were for a different kind of person, and so you became excellent at the work itself, and you let the wealth thinking sit on the other side of a wall you called your schedule. The busy badge, the status signal introduced earlier as a way of announcing worth, is doing a second job you may not have authorized it to do. It is not just announcing that you matter. It is justifying every single day why the scarier work has not been done. If you are this busy, who could ask more of you? If your calendar is this full, how could anyone, including yourself, hold you responsible for not building the financial position you said you wanted? That is the real tax, not just the hours. The permission those hours grant you to stay exactly where you are. Here is what changes when you see this clearly. The busyness does not have to stop. You can keep the full calendar, the real work, the legitimate demands on your time. What has to change is the story underneath it. The story that says the doing is the building. The story that says effort spent is worth earned. The story that lets each productive day substitute for a strategic one. Because the person who says they are too busy to invest is not describing a time problem. They are describing an identity problem. And identity problems do not resolve through scheduling. They resolve through a decision, small and quiet and private, that you are the kind of person who does this now. Not the kind of person who plans to, not the kind of person who will once things calm down. Now, the doing you are so good at is not the enemy. It never was. But when the doing stands between you and the deciding, you are not building wealth. You are building a beautiful, efficient wall around the version of yourself that already has it. Chapter 7. The leverage ladder has a first rung. You already have everything you need to start building leverage. That sounds like the kind of soft encouragement people offer when they want you to feel better without actually helping you. It is not. It is a precise statement about what leverage actually requires at the beginning. The answer is not capital, not connections, not a business degree, and not a single dollar you do not already own. The reason this sounds wrong is that you have been watching people operate from the middle and top of the leverage ladder, never from the bottom. The first rung has stayed invisible to you, but it is there. It has always been there. And the only thing standing between you and it is a decision you have not yet made about how you spend a specific kind of time. A single question drives this chapter all the way through this section. Not what leverage is, you have a working sense of that by now. The question is where exactly it begins for someone who has nothing extra to invest, no audience, no product, and a schedule that already feels full. Hold that question. The answer is coming, but not yet. First, you need to see something clearly about where you currently stand. That wall the last chapter described, the beautiful, efficient wall built from relentless doing, is not just a metaphor for a mindset problem. It is a description of how your hours are physically arranged right now. Every hour you give to someone else in exchange for a fixed dollar amount is a brick in that wall. The craft is real. The skill is real. The income is real, but the ceiling is also real. You feel it every time you think about what it would take to earn more. The answer is always the same. More hours, more effort, more doing. That is the trap. Step back to the way your money was really working at that point 3 years back and look only at the money side. Not emotionally, not in terms of personal growth, just financially. How many hours did you work that year? Now think about how many hours you worked last year. If the second number is larger and the money did not grow proportionally, you have just measured the leverage gap in your own life. That gap is not a motivation problem. It is a structural problem. Structural problems require structural solutions, not harder effort applied to the same structure. Marcus ran a mobile detailing business out of a second-hand van he bought for $3,000. He was meticulous. Clients loved him. His Saturdays were booked 8 weeks out, and during peak months he worked 11 days straight without a day off. He was earning decent money. Not great money. Decent money. And then one January his back gave out. 2 weeks of forced rest, 0 income, and a stack of apology texts to clients who rescheduled and in some cases did not come back. During those 2 weeks, lying flat on his floor and genuinely scared about rent, he started writing down everything he knew about detailing. Not to sell it, just to occupy his mind. He wrote down his product ratios, his sequence, his techniques for cleaning interiors that other dealers skipped. He wrote down how to price jobs and how to handle clients who wanted to negotiate. He filled 43 pages. A friend saw the document and told him he should sell it. Marcus thought that was ridiculous. Who would pay for this? He put a rough PDF together anyway and listed it for $17 on a platform that took 15 minutes to set up. He did no marketing. 3 months later, 41 people had bought it. Not life-changing money. $700 for work he did once, flat on his back, scared and bored. But something shifted in him when he saw that number. He had sold something while sleeping. He had earned money he did not trade hours for. And he had done it with nothing except what he already knew. That PDF was the first rung. Here is what Marcus discovered and what you need to understand clearly before this chapter ends. The first rung of the leverage ladder is not a passive income stream. It is not a business. It is not a product launch, a personal brand, or a content strategy. The first rung is a single decision: to stop letting the ceiling hour go to waste. The ceiling hour is the last productive hour of your working day. The one where you are technically still available but mentally done. You probably fill it with low-effort busy work, checking messages, organizing files, scrolling to decompress before decompressing officially. That hour costs you nothing to redirect. It belongs to no client. It is owed to no employer, and for most people it vanishes every single weekday without producing anything that compounds. You are not being asked to sacrifice sleep. You are not being asked to hustle harder. You are being asked to look at the hour you are already wasting and ask a different question about it. What is one thing you know, deeply and specifically, that someone else would pay to learn or have? Not in theory. Think concretely. A skill you use at work that people in adjacent industries do not have. A process you have refined through repetition that someone starting out would spend months learning through trial and error. A system, a framework, a sequence, a cheat sheet. The specificity is the value. Vague knowledge has no market. Precise, earned, tested knowledge has enormous market value. And most of it sits unmonetized inside people who assume what they know is too common to be worth anything. It is not. Now here are 3 entry points. 3 first rungs that require no money, no audience, and no infrastructure beyond what you likely already have access to. The first is packaged knowledge. This is what Marcus built. Take something you know that took years to master and reduce it to something someone else can use in an afternoon. A PDF, a short course, a checklist, a recorded walkthrough. Price it low enough that the decision to buy is easy. Sell it on a platform that already has traffic so you do not need to build an audience first. The goal is not to get rich from this one product. The goal is to experience once the feeling of earning money from something other than your direct labor. That experience rewires something. Once you feel it, you cannot unfeel it. The second is time arbitrage through reselling information or access. You know something, or know someone, or have access to something that others would pay to shortcut their way to. This can be as simple as sourcing. If you know where to find a thing cheaply, and others want that thing and do not know what you know, the gap between those two facts is a business. It does not require you to make anything. It requires you to recognize that your knowledge of where and how is itself a transferable asset. The third is structured service productization. This one sounds more complex but is simple in execution. If you currently sell your time hourly, the first rung here is to stop pricing by the hour and start pricing by the outcome. Bundle your service into a defined package with a defined deliverable and a defined price. This does not immediately give you leverage, but it does something critical. It forces you to define what you actually produce, separate from how long it takes you to produce it. That separation is the conceptual foundation all leverage is built on. You cannot build above a rung you have not yet stepped on. None of these require capital. They require a decision about your ceiling hour, and they require you to stop believing that what you know is too ordinary to have value. Here is where the open loop closes. You held a question since the beginning of this chapter. Where does leverage begin for someone with no extra money, no audience, and a full schedule? The answer is this. Leverage begins the moment you stop pricing your knowledge by the hour and start attaching it to an object, a document, a package, a defined outcome that can exist without your physical presence. The hour you spend creating that object is still a traded hour, but every hour the object works after that is not. That gap between the hour you spent and the hours it keeps earning is where the leverage ladder begins. This is not about getting rich from a PDF. Nobody is pretending otherwise. This is about breaking the psychological and structural grip of the belief that your time is the only thing you have to sell. Because as long as you believe that, you will keep building the wall. Soon, we turn toward an argument about building an audience that runs straight against the usual belief. After that clicks, it changes how you choose where to spend those ceiling hours. Dana, if you have been tracking her story across these chapters, took the first rung on a Tuesday night in early October. She spent 40 minutes writing a one-page summary of the hiring process at the company she had worked at for 6 years. The internal process, the actual criteria, the things that got resumes discarded before any human read them. She sent it to a friend who was job hunting. The friend shared it. 3 people asked if there was more. There was. Dana wrote more. She charged $8 for the expanded version. 22 people bought it in the first month. She did not quit her job. She did not become an entrepreneur overnight. She stepped on a rung. That is the whole move. The ceiling hour is waiting for you right now, not tomorrow, not after you clear your plate or finish the busy stretch or get to a calmer season. The calmer season is not coming. You know this. The question is whether you will wait for it anyway, or take the first rung with the hour you already have. Leverage begins the moment you build something that works when you don't. Chapter 8. Saying no is your highest ROI skill. Every request on your time is costing you money, not metaphorically, literally. Right now today, the emails you answered, the favors you agreed to, the meetings you said yes to without thinking, each one had a price tag. You just never saw the receipt, and because you never saw it, the cost kept accumulating. Quietly. The way interest compounds on a debt you forgot you were carrying. This is not about the hour you spent in a meeting. It is about what that hour would have built if you had protected it. The system you would have designed. The asset you would have moved forward, the revenue that would have arrived while you slept, if only you had started building it 6 months ago instead of staying helpful, staying available, staying busy. That is the real number. Not the hour, the future that hour was quietly carrying. And here is the tension nobody names. The very thing that makes you good at your job, the responsiveness, the reliability, the willingness to show up, is the exact mechanism bleeding your wealth. You are not losing money because you are failing. You are losing it because you are succeeding at the wrong thing. That changes here. You already know that leverage begins the moment you build something that works when you don't. But a system can only grow in the space you protect for it. Most people never protect that space. Not because they are lazy, because they are trained, deeply and deliberately trained, to treat every incoming request as something that deserves a response. That training is the leak. There is one question underneath this section all the way through this section. Why is it that the most productive, most capable, most reliable people you know are often the ones with the least financial traction? Sit with that. The answer is not what you expect. It will not fully land until you see the mechanism underneath it. Think about Marcus. He was 31, a freelance developer, one of the most technically capable people on any project he touched. Clients loved him. His inbox was never empty because demand was never the problem. He took every project that made reasonable financial sense. He answered every message within the hour. He said yes to revisions, yes to extended timelines, yes to the quick calls that ran 40 minutes. He was proud of it. He called it professionalism. By 33, Marcus had billed more hours than he could count, but he had built nothing. No product, no recurring revenue, no system that worked without him. He had swapped 2 years of his prime building capacity for a reputation as someone who was always available, sought after and financially stagnant at exactly the same time. One afternoon, a former classmate reached out, a woman named Diane. She had left corporate work 3 years earlier to build a small software tool for a niche industry. Diane was slower to respond to messages. She did not take every client. She had said no to more work than Marcus had ever been offered. But the tool she built generated a steady monthly income whether she was working that month or not. Marcus asked her how she decided what to say no to. She said she used one question. Does this request require my hours forever, or does it create something that eventually works without them? If the answer was the first, she said no unless the money was exceptional. If the answer was the second, she protected it like her life depended on it. Because, she said, it does. Marcus sat with that for a long time. A single question. That is all it took to show him how little of his time had been pointing in the direction of actual wealth. Here is what Diane understood that most high-performing people spend years refusing to accept. Saying no is not a rejection of work. It is a selection of what kind of work gets your irreplaceable hours. And that selection is, in every measurable sense, the most financially consequential decision you make on any given day. Your identity may be pushing back on that right now. You might be feeling something quiet but firm, the sense that saying no makes you difficult or ungrateful or less valuable. That feeling is not random. It was installed. The culture you grew up inside taught you that responsiveness equals competence, that availability equals loyalty, that busyness signals worth. Every performance review that praised you for going above and beyond was reinforcing a financial trap. You were being rewarded for the behavior that keeps wealth at arm's length. This is the busy badge from another angle. You have been wearing it as proof of value. But the badge is not neutral. It carries a cost. And that cost is denominated in the one currency you can never earn back. Time is the only input that cannot be replaced. Money lost can be made again. Reputation recovers. Relationships repair. Time spent on the wrong thing is simply gone. Every yes you give to a request that trades your hours for someone else's convenience is drawing from the only account with no deposit option. Now here is the leverage test. When a request comes in, any request, a project, a meeting, a favor, a task, before you answer, run it through this. Ask yourself one thing. If I say yes to this, what specific asset-building activity does it displace? Not in the abstract. Specifically, what were you going to work on today that moves you toward income that does not require your presence? Name it. If you cannot name it, that is important information. It means you do not yet have a clear enough picture of what you are building. If you can name it, the choice becomes visible. You are not choosing between saying yes to this request and saying no. You are choosing between this request and the thing you just named. That is the accounting, and it is always happening whether you see it or not. Each yes to a task is a no to an asset, every single time without exception. The math does not care how kind the requester was, how reasonable the ask seemed, how guilty you felt declining. The hour went somewhere. The question is only whether it went towards something that keeps generating value after the hour is over. Most people never see this trade. They see the request, they feel the social pressure, they respond, and the morning is gone. They do not see the compound cost. They do not track what got displaced. And because they never see the full ledger, they never feel the full weight of what the pattern is costing them. Look back at your actual circumstances at that point 3 years back, as it really was. Think about the projects you agreed to, the favors you said yes to, the meetings that filled your calendar but left no lasting mark. Now think about the thing you kept saying you would get to. The idea you carried for 2 years before losing momentum. The asset you almost started building. Sit there for a moment, not to feel regret, but to make the cost concrete. Because concrete costs change behavior in a way that abstract ones never do. 3 years is 12 quarters, 48 months, 200 working weeks. That is an enormous amount of building capacity. The question is not whether you used it. You used every hour. The question is what it went toward. Now imagine the next 3 years with a different filter running. Imagine that every incoming request gets one question applied to it before you respond. Imagine that question creating a pause. In that pause, you choose differently. Not always, not dramatically, but more often than before and with more intention than before. Imagine what gets built in the margins of that shift. This is not a demand for radical refusal. You have obligations. You have relationships that matter. You have a job that requires your cooperation, a life that requires your presence. Nobody is suggesting you become a hermit or a machine. What is being suggested is something far more precise. A filter. A moment of conscious accounting before the yes leaves your mouth. Because here is what most people discover once they start running the leverage test. The majority of requests that felt urgent were not actually urgent. Most of the meetings that felt mandatory were not actually mandatory. Most of the favors that felt obligatory could have been declined gracefully, with a simple explanation and no lasting damage. The social cost of a thoughtful no is almost always smaller than it feels in the moment before you say it. And the financial cost of the thoughtless yes is almost always larger than it registers in the moment you agree. Later on, we turn toward an argument about reputation and financial success that runs straight against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it changes how you respond to opportunity itself. But right now, in this chapter, the one thing that needs to land is this. The person who builds real financial traction is not the most available person in the room. They are the most protective of their building time. Not because they are selfish, because they understand the accounting that everyone else is ignoring. Marcus eventually built something. It took him 18 months after that conversation with Diane. He said no to 3 clients during that period who would have kept him fully occupied. He felt the discomfort of that space. He sat with the quiet that comes when you stop filling every hour with someone else's priority. And in that quiet, he built a tool that eventually generated income without his daily involvement. He still takes projects, but now he knows what he is trading when he does. The most expensive word in your vocabulary right now is not a purchase. It is not a subscription or an investment gone wrong. It is the yes you say before you run the numbers. Before you name what it displaces. Before you ask whether this hour is moving you towards something that eventually works without you. Refusal is not laziness. Refusal is financial strategy with a clean conscience. The yes that protects your time is not a luxury. It is the highest return decision available to you right now. Chapter 9. the metric that replaces hours worked. Tracking hours worked is one of the most reliable ways to stay poor while feeling productive. That sounds like an insult to every early morning you have ever dragged yourself out of bed before your alarm, every late night you spent finishing something nobody asked you to finish. It is not an insult. It is a diagnosis. Once you see what hours tracked actually measures, you will not be able to unsee it. That is exactly where this chapter needs to take you. Here is what hours worked measures: effort. Here is what effort does not measure: wealth creation. Those two things have almost nothing to do with each other. The gap between them is where most people's financial lives quietly collapse. You have been handed a ruler and told to measure distance, but the ruler is calibrated for weight. It is not that you are measuring poorly. It is that you are measuring the wrong thing entirely. There is a number that tells you the truth. One number, simple enough to calculate in your head during a Tuesday commute, brutal enough to reorder your entire day once you see it clearly. That number is your net worth per hour. By the time this chapter ends, you will know how to use it. The last chapter closed with a statement about the yes that protects your time being the highest return decision available to you. Hold that thought. A decision can only be high return if you have a way to measure return. Without a metric, you are guessing. Elegant guessing, maybe. Disciplined guessing, even. But still guessing. This chapter gives you the measuring instrument. Here is the open question you should carry into the next several minutes. If your net worth per hour came out to a number you found genuinely shameful, would you change your behavior tomorrow, or would you explain it away? Keep that question warm. You will need it later. Return to your actual circumstances at that point 3 years back as it really was. What did your average day look like? How many hours did you put in? Now ask the harder question. Are you meaningfully wealthier? Not richer in experience, not more skilled, not more connected, though all of those things may be true. Wealthier. Does the number that represents your actual financial position reflect 3 years of effort? For most people listening to this right now, the honest answer is not proportionally. You worked hard. The wealth did not keep pace. That gap has a name, and the name is not laziness. The gap is called leverage failure. Meet Dana. Dana is 31 years old, earns $62,000 a year as a project coordinator, and works between 50 and 55 hours most weeks. Dana tracks everything. There is a task management app on her phone and a color-coded calendar on her laptop. She hits her to-do list almost every day. She is, by any conventional measure, a high performer. Her manager says so. Her colleagues notice it. She feels it in her body at the end of every week, that clean, exhausted satisfaction of someone who emptied themselves into their work. One Sunday afternoon, Dana does something she has never done before. She does the math. She takes her annual salary. She divides it by 52. She gets her weekly income. She divides that by 52 hours worked. She gets her hourly rate, roughly $23 an hour. Then she looks at her net worth, her savings, minus her debt, the actual number that represents her financial position in the world. It is $12,000, positive but barely. She has been working at this pace for 4 years. She stares at that number for a long time. Then she does the second calculation. She takes those 4 years, 52 weeks each, 52 hours each week. That is over 10,000 hours of work, 10,000 hours of effort, discipline, execution, completion. And the wealth that remains, the number that would exist if she stopped working tomorrow, is $12,000. Spread across 10,000 hours, that is $1.20 of net worth created per hour worked. Dana is not undisciplined. She is not unfocused. Dana is measuring the wrong thing. That number $1.20 is not a verdict on Dana's worth as a person. It is a reading on a dial. And dials exist so you can adjust the machine. Here is what net worth per hour actually reveals. It does not punish effort. It does not reward laziness. What it does is separate activities that build a position from activities that merely sustain one. When you trade time for a wage, you sustain your lifestyle. When you trade time for an asset, a skill that commands higher prices, a business that operates without you, a financial position that earns while you sleep, you build a position. Sustained effort keeps the lights on. Positioned effort makes the lights unnecessary. Most productivity systems cannot tell the difference. They count tasks. They celebrate completion. They reward the checkbox, not the compound effect. And so they inadvertently train you to be a better sustainer, a more efficient treader of water, when what your financial life needs is entirely different motion. The math is simple enough to do right now. Take your net worth, your savings, your investments, whatever you own, minus whatever you owe. Take the number of working hours you have logged in the last 12 months. Divide the first by the second. What you get is your current net worth per hour, not your income per hour, not your productivity per hour, your wealth per hour. The number that tells you whether your hours are building something or merely keeping something running. For a lot of people, that number is low enough to cause physical discomfort when they first see it. Good. Discomfort from an accurate measurement is more useful than comfort from a false one. Here is what changes when you use this metric instead of tasks completed. Every morning you face a version of the same question. What do I do today? When your answer is organized by task lists, you choose by urgency and volume. You clear the inbox. You finish the report. You respond, produce, submit, repeat. This is not wrong. These things need doing. But none of them on their own ask the more important question. Does doing this thing increase the number I am tracking? When your answer is organized by net worth per hour, the question changes shape entirely. You stop asking what needs to get done. You start asking what, if I do it today, will be worth more in 6 months than the time I put in is worth right now. That is a leverage question. Leverage questions produce different behavior than efficiency questions. Dana runs the numbers a second time, but differently. She looks at her week ahead and identifies 2 things. 1 hour every weekday morning, set aside not for tasks but for positioning. She starts learning the software her industry is moving toward. She begins building a small body of work that demonstrates a skill her current role does not use. She is not working more hours. She is working the same hours with a different internal question organizing her choices. 6 months later, her net worth per hour has not doubled. It has not tripled, but it has moved noticeably, measurably. And the direction matters more than the magnitude, because direction reveals whether the machine is pointed the right way. Here is something worth understanding about this metric. It is slow to respond, and then fast. Most wealth-building activity has a delay between the effort and the reflected number. You spend 6 months learning something before the market pays you more for it. You spend a year building something before it earns independently. During that delay, your net worth per hour might actually look worse on paper. You are investing hours into the future rather than cashing them out today. This is why the metric requires patience to use correctly, but it also has a breaking point. A moment when the positioning work compounds enough to show up in the number, and from that point the number begins moving faster than your hours justify. That is the signature of leverage. You will recognize it when it happens, because the feeling is the opposite of exhaustion. It is the strange, slightly uncomfortable sensation of receiving more than you put in. Most people never reach that point. Not because they are not capable, but because they measure hours completed instead of net worth created. Hours completed never tells you when to stop doing one thing and start doing another. Now return to the question I asked you to hold earlier. If your net worth per hour came out to a number you found shameful, would you change your behavior tomorrow? Most people, when they actually run the number, do not change immediately. They explain. They contextualize. They say the timing is wrong, the market is unfair. The number does not account for benefits or stability or all the intangible things their work provides. Some of that is true. But watch what happens when explanation becomes the primary response to an accurate measurement. It is a protection mechanism, a way of keeping the current system intact because the current system, however inefficient, is familiar. Explanation is how the busy badge survives contact with evidence. The metric does not care about your explanation. It only cares about the direction of travel, and you can choose to use that or you can choose not to. As this book keeps moving, we turn toward an argument about consistency that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it changes how you decide what to spend your best hours on. For now, one thing is enough. One number, net worth per hour, not productivity per hour, not tasks completed, not meetings attended or emails cleared or projects delivered. The number that measures whether your time is building a position in the world or merely maintaining the one you already have. Dana knew she was productive before she ran the math. Running the math told her something productivity never could. The machine was running well in the wrong direction. The real question is not how many hours you worked this week. The real question is what those hours are worth to the version of you that exists 3 years from now. Chapter 10. Rest is not the opposite of wealth. Right now, something is draining from your life that you cannot see on any statement or spreadsheet. It is not money exactly. It is the thinking you are not doing. Every week you fill with recovery, with collapsing on the couch, with sleeping through Saturday morning because the previous 5 days hollowed you out, is a week where the ideas that could change your financial position never get a chance to form. And this is not 1 week's loss. It compounds. The insight you did not have in January could have become a decision in March, a result by August, a different life by next winter. But it was never born, not because you are not smart enough, not because the idea was not in you, because you never gave it the conditions it needed to surface. That is what this chapter is about, not rest as recovery. Rest as the specific, protected, deliberate environment where leverage ideas come from. Here is the question that should stay with you as we go. What exactly is your mind doing on Sunday? Think carefully before you answer. The answer tells you more about your financial future than your salary does. There is a version of Sunday that most people live. You know this version. The week has been heavy. The meetings stacked. The tasks multiplied. Friday afternoon arrived and you crossed the finish line of the workweek feeling like you had survived something. Saturday was errands and obligations. And now Sunday is here and your one job, the one thing your body is insisting on, is to do nothing, to recover, to fill the tank back up so Monday can empty it again. Dana lives this version. She is 28, earns a reasonable salary in project coordination and works genuinely hard. 50, sometimes 55 hours a week. She is not lazy. Nobody who knows her would say that word about her. Her weekends are quiet because she has earned quiet. Sunday is her reset. She watches something, reads something light, eats something good, goes to bed at a decent hour. By Monday morning she is ready. Capable, present. And every Sunday for 4 years, the version of Dana that earns twice as much and controls her own time has stayed exactly where it has always been, unreached. Not because Dana lacks ambition, because Dana's Sunday is built entirely around Monday. That is the cost nobody names, not fatigue. The cost is orientation. When rest exists only to serve the next block of work, it never serves you. It serves the system that keeps you inside it. Now here is what changes. Researchers who study creative output and high-performance cognition have found something that initially seems counterintuitive. The people who produce the most original and economically valuable ideas are not the ones who work the most hours. They are the ones who protect specific periods of unfocused, unscheduled mental time, not sleep, not leisure in the passive sense, something more deliberate than both, time that is quiet enough for the mind to wander without destination and long enough for that wandering to arrive somewhere. The distinction is not rest versus work. The distinction is rest for recovery versus rest for generation. One fills the tank. The other builds a different engine entirely. A Sunday built around Monday fills the tank. That is Dana's Sunday. Filling the tank is not nothing, but it is the minimum. It keeps you functional. It does not move you. A Sunday built around thinking not about tasks, not about inbox, but about the larger questions of how your resources, your skills, your time, and your relationships could be arranged differently. That Sunday is doing something else. It is producing the one thing that hourly effort cannot produce. Insight that has leverage. Here is the parable. Marcus was a logistics coordinator who worked for a mid-sized shipping company in a city where logistics work is invisible and endless. He was 31, good at his job, known for his reliability. At various points he had considered starting something of his own, but the week never left room for the thought to develop. He recovered on weekends. He was ready for Monday. He did this for 6 years. One August, his brother-in-law invited him to spend a Saturday afternoon on a lake about 2 hours from the city. No agenda, no phones by unspoken agreement, just water and time. Marcus sat in a chair on a small dock for most of the afternoon and did what he almost never did. He let his mind go without directing it. He thought about a problem his company kept encountering with last-mile delivery in older neighborhoods. Not because he had to, because his mind wandered there the way minds do when they are finally free. By the time they drove home, he had the outline of a small routing system in his head. Not complicated, specific to one type of problem. He built it over 3 months of deliberate Sunday thinking sessions, not Sunday recovery. He licensed it to 2 other companies within a year. It now generates more each quarter than he earns in 4 months of salary. Marcus did not become successful because he worked harder. He became successful because he stopped pointing his rest backward at the previous week and started pointing it forward at the next question. The doc did not give him the idea. It gave him the conditions the idea needed. Think about the last 3 years of your own life. Think about the Sunday mornings, the quiet Saturday afternoons, the long weekends that felt like breathing room. Where did that time go? Not where did you spend it, where did it actually go? Was it pointed backward at recovery, at neutralizing the cost of the previous week? Or was it pointed forward at something unbuilt, unasked, unconsidered? If you cannot answer clearly, the answer is probably the first one. Most people's answer is the first one, and that is not a character flaw. It is what the cycle of exhaustion produces. Rest that maintains the cycle rather than questioning it. This is the leverage gap in its quietest form, not the gap between what you earn and what you could earn. The gap between the thinking you are doing and the thinking that would change what is possible. You cannot close that gap with more hours. You can only close it with different time, protected time. Time that is not promised to recovery, not promised to productivity, not promised to anyone or anything except the slow, unscheduled movement of your own mind. In a later section, we turn toward an argument about focus that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it changes how you decide where your best hours go. But before that resolution arrives, you need the foundation this chapter is building. Because the productive person and the wealthy person do not rest the same way, they are not even resting for the same reason. The productive person rests to recover performance. Rest is maintenance. It is the oil change that lets the engine keep running at the same rate. There is nothing wrong with this. Performance requires maintenance. But the productive person treats rest as an input to more output, and that framing keeps them permanently inside the output loop. The wealthy person rests to think more clearly. And by wealthy, I mean the person who has built something that earns without requiring their constant presence. Not to think more, to think more clearly. There is a specific quality of cognition that only becomes available when the mind is not managing anything, when the inbox is not hovering, when the next task has no grip. In that state, the mind does something remarkable. It begins to sort for importance rather than urgency. It begins to surface connections between things that seemed unrelated. It begins to ask questions that productive life never leaves room for. Questions like, is this the right direction, not just the current direction? Is there a version of this that works without me? What would I build if I were starting from zero this week? These are the questions that produce leverage, and they require conditions that scheduled recovery cannot provide. This does not mean you stop recovering. You need sleep. You need the tank filled. That is not what is being asked of you here. What is being asked is that you separate recovery time from generative time. That you protect some portion of your week, even 90 minutes, even one slow Sunday morning with coffee and no destination, where you are not recovering and you are not producing. You are thinking, without a deliverable, without a deadline, without a correct answer waiting at the end. This is what the research describes as diffuse thinking. The mind in an unconstricted state, and the output of that state, when the person using it has knowledge, experience, and a real problem to eventually address, is the kind of insight that scheduled productive work cannot manufacture on demand. It has to be allowed. It has to be given space to arrive without being rushed. Dana's Sunday is not wrong. Dana is not doing anything wrong, but Dana's Sunday has a ceiling. It will keep her functional right up until the moment she wonders why nothing has changed. And the answer to that wondering will be subtle and true and probably the hardest thing to hear. Nothing changed because all of her time, including her rest, was arranged in service of staying. Not growing, staying capable, staying ready. Staying inside a structure that was not built to expand her. The tank gets full. The tank empties. The tank gets full again. This is not wealth. This is endurance. Generative rest breaks the cycle. Not by adding hours, but by changing what some hours are for. Your Sunday does not have to be about Monday anymore. What question has been waiting unasked because the week never left room for it? Chapter 11. Your skills are an asset you've never monetized. Doing the work better has never once made you wealthier. That sounds like an attack on everything you were taught. It is not. It is a description of a structural problem that most skilled people never examine. The act of doing the work feels so much like progress that questioning the structure beneath it seems almost ungrateful. But here is the thing. The better you get at your skill, the more efficiently you trade it away. Every hour of improved performance is an hour someone else captures the surplus from. You are not building an asset. You are sharpening a tool that belongs to someone else's machine. This chapter is about changing that, not by working less, not by abandoning what you are good at, by understanding that what lives inside your head, the organized knowledge, the earned instinct, the practiced judgment, is already an asset. It has just never been packaged as one. That question from the last chapter is still sitting there. What question has been waiting unasked because the week never left room for it? For a lot of people, that question is this one. Is what I know worth something on its own terms, separate from the hours I spend delivering it? The answer is yes. And the gap between knowing that and doing something about it is where most skilled people spend their entire working lives. Here is the open loop you should carry into this chapter. If two people have the same skill, the same depth of knowledge, the same years of earned experience, why does one of them earn 4 times more than the other? The answer is not effort. It is not talent. By the end of this chapter, you will know exactly what it is. Think about your work for a moment. Not the industry, not the job title. The actual granular thing you do when you are good at your job. Maybe you can look at a spreadsheet and immediately identify where the numbers are lying. Maybe you can read a room in a negotiation and know which objection is real and which one is theater. Maybe you can take something complicated and explain it in language that makes someone feel smart for understanding it. You have done this so many times that it no longer feels remarkable to you. That is the trap. Familiarity has made your skill invisible to you. This is where most people stop. They perform the skill, collect the compensation, and never ask the next question. The next question is the one that changes everything. Can this knowledge be separated from my time? Most people assume the answer is no. They believe their skill requires their presence, their real-time judgment, their live performance. And for the act of doing the work, that is true. But the knowledge behind the act, the framework, the decision tree, the pattern recognition built over years, that does not require your presence. It requires packaging. Dana ran a small accounting firm for 11 years, not a glamorous example. Not the kind of story that gets told at conferences. Dana was good at her job in the specific, grinding way that comes from doing something thousands of times until the exception stops surprising you. She worked 50 hours a week, billed 40 of them, and had learned over the years that the ceiling on her income was basically the ceiling on her available hours. She knew this. She accepted it the way people accept weather. What she also knew, though she had never said it out loud, was that the same 12 mistakes appeared in nearly every small business she worked with. Not variations. The same 12. The same wrong categories, the same missed deductions, the same confusion about quarterly timing that cost clients money year after year. She had built in her own head a mental map of small business accounting errors so precise that she could walk into a new client's books and find the problems in 90 minutes that would have taken a junior accountant 2 days. That map was her real asset. She had been renting it out by the hour. One afternoon, without any grand intention, Dana started writing down the 12 mistakes, not as a report, just as a document for herself, so she would not have to reconstruct the explanation every time. It took her 3 hours over 2 evenings. She added the questions she always asked, the indicators she looked for, the language she used to explain each problem to a client who had never thought about accounting before. When she finished, she had 47 pages. She sent it to a colleague as a reference. The colleague forwarded it. Someone in a small business forum asked if it was available anywhere. Dana put a price on it almost as a joke. 73 people bought it in the first month. She had not done 73 consultations. She had not worked 73 hours. She had written 47 pages once, and 73 people paid for access to what was inside her head. Sit with that for a second. The skill did not change. The knowledge did not change. The years of experience did not change. The only thing that changed was the form in which the knowledge left her possession. Instead of performing it live for one person at a time, she packaged it once and sold it to many. This is the leverage gap. This is what this entire book has been building toward describing, not as an abstract principle, as a mechanical fact. Time for skill is a 1-to-1 ratio. Package for scale is a 1-to-many ratio. The math does not need motivation or mindset or any other soft prerequisite. It just needs you to accept that the ratio is real, and that you have been choosing the wrong one by default, not by design. Here is your mirror moment. Cast your mind back 3 years and look clearly in your skill, not your career. Your actual skill. Think about what you know now that you did not know then. Think about the specific decisions you make faster, the problems you diagnose earlier, the errors you avoid without even noticing anymore. How many hours did it take to build that knowledge? Now ask yourself, how much of that knowledge has ever been packaged in a form that earns without your physical presence? For most people, the answer is none. That is not a character flaw. It is a product of an education system that trained you to perform skills on demand and never asked you to consider the architecture beneath the performance. School prepared you to be an excellent employee. It never prepared you to be an owner of what you know. The difference between an employee and an asset owner is not income. It is not even mindset, despite what half the internet wants to tell you. The difference is structural. One person delivers value in real time and is paid for the delivery. The other packages value into a form that delivers without their presence and is paid for the package. Same knowledge, completely different financial outcome over time. Now here is where people get stuck. They hear this and they think about complexity. They think about the full scope of what they do and how impossible it would be to capture all of it. And they are right. You cannot package everything. You do not need to. You need one thing, one recurring problem you solve, one question you get asked repeatedly, one decision you help people make that they consistently get wrong without you. One piece of knowledge narrow enough to be useful and specific enough to be trusted. That is the starting point. Not a full system, not a complete curriculum. One thing, packaged well, released once. Before long, we turn toward an argument about selling what they know that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it changes how you approach every offer you ever make. For now, stay with the starting point. The question is not whether your skill is valuable enough to package. It is. Years of performed excellence have already proven that. The question is whether you are willing to spend time on the packaging instead of spending time on the performance. And that requires a brief, uncomfortable identity negotiation. Most skilled people are deeply attached to the doing. The act of performing your skill well is tied to your sense of worth. You feel useful when you are helping someone in real time. You feel competent when you are solving a live problem. The idea of sitting alone, writing or recording or building, without a client in front of you, can feel like you are not actually working. It can feel like you are stealing time from the people who depend on you. That feeling is the most expensive feeling in this book, because that feeling is the mechanism by which the cultural equation of busyness and productivity holds you in place. It rewards real-time performance with approval. It makes packaging feel self-indulgent. It turns the most leveraged thing you could do with your time into something that feels like a guilty diversion from your real responsibilities. Your real responsibility to your financial future is to stop performing exclusively and start packaging deliberately. Dana did not quit her accounting firm. She did not abandon her clients. She spent 3 evenings on 47 pages and added a revenue stream that did not require her presence. Small, specific, repeatable, that is the model, not dramatic, not complex. One piece of packaged knowledge offered once, available indefinitely. Now close the loop you have been carrying. 2 people. Same skill, same depth, same years. One earns 4 times more. The answer is not talent. It is not effort. It is that one person found a way to let their knowledge travel without them. The knowledge earned while they slept, while they were with their family, while they were working on the next thing. The other person was still in the room, performing, billing, trading hours for worth in a ratio that will never change no matter how skilled they become. The skill set already exists inside you. Everything you need is already there. The missing step is not more practice. It is not more time. The missing step is the act of packaging what you know so that it can earn without requiring you to be present for every transaction. You do not need to build an empire to start. You need 47 pages. Or maybe you need 20 minutes of recorded audio, or a 1-page checklist distilled from 5 years of hard-won experience. Or a single workshop taught once and recorded, living online while you do something else entirely. The performing version of you has a ceiling. The packaging version of you does not. Which version are you building? Chapter 12. The word productive should make you nervous. Across every era of human civilization, there has been a class of people who worked the hardest and owned the least. Not because they lacked discipline, not because they failed to show up. They showed up every single day, often before anyone else arrived and long after everyone else left. They were praised for it, celebrated, held up as the model. And yet something quietly ensured that all that effort, all that sweat, all that relentless output stayed right where it started. It never became wealth. It became more work. This pattern is so old it barely registers as a pattern anymore. It just looks like life. But you are near the end of this book now, which means you have been asking a different kind of question than most people ask. This chapter is where that question starts to have edges sharp enough to cut. Which version are you building? The chapter before this left a question hanging, and it is still in the room. And the answer depends almost entirely on which word you use to describe yourself. Here is the open loop this chapter will carry. There is a compliment, a single, widely celebrated compliment that you have probably received at least once in your adult life, maybe many times. And every time you received it, something inside you felt proud. You should feel something different the next time you hear it. Not shame, not anger, something more useful than both. By the time this chapter ends, you will know exactly what that feeling is and why it matters more than most financial advice you have ever been given. The word is productive. Think about the last time someone called you productive. A manager, a colleague, a parent, a partner. Maybe you called yourself that. You finished a packed day, looked back at the list and thought, "Good, I was productive today." That feeling is real. The satisfaction is genuine. And it is also, in a very specific way, a warning signal you have been trained not to hear. Here is why. Productive means you produced output proportional to your input. You put in time and energy and you got tasks completed. The ratio is roughly 1-to-1. You traded hours for results. This is the exact same economic structure as a person working a minimum wage job. The unit of production changes. The underlying math does not. Now consider the word wealthy. Wealth does not operate on a 1-to-1 ratio. Wealth operates on a decoupled ratio. Output begins to exceed input. The hours you spent last Tuesday are still generating something this Tuesday without you being there. That is a fundamentally different relationship with time. Productive never gets you there. Productive keeps you excellent at the trade. Picture your actual circumstances at that point 3 years back as it really was. Not geographically, financially, mentally, in terms of how you spent your days. Were you being productive then? Almost certainly yes. You have probably been productive for years. Now ask the honest question. How much of that productivity converted into wealth that works without you? How much of it became leverage? How much of it would continue generating anything at all if you stopped showing up tomorrow? That is the mirror this chapter holds up, not to make you feel behind, to make you feel clear. There is a woman named Claudette. She ran a small marketing consultancy from her home office, 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Her clients called her indispensable. Her inbox was a monument to how needed she was. At the end of every month, she invoiced, got paid, and started over. 5 years in, she was earning well. She was also exhausted in a way she could not name. From the outside, everything looked like success. Then one afternoon, a former client sent her a note. It said, simply, "You are the most productive person I have ever worked with." Claudette read it and felt proud for exactly 4 seconds. Then she looked around her office, at the same desk, the same stacks, the same calendar already full for the next 6 weeks, and realized the compliment described a trap she had decorated beautifully. She was producing constantly and building nothing that did not require her presence to exist. The compliment was accurate. That was precisely the problem. Claudette eventually restructured, not overnight, but the restructuring began the moment she stopped accepting productive as a compliment and started reading it as a diagnostic. You can do the same thing. Language is not just description. Language is architecture. The words you use to define yourself quietly determine which decisions feel available to you. When you identify as a productive person, your brain organizes your choices around maintaining that identity. It looks for more tasks to complete, more efficiency to squeeze out, more output to justify the input. It is optimizing for the wrong variable. And it does this invisibly, because productivity is so thoroughly praised in this culture that questioning it feels almost irresponsible. But here is the contradiction hiding in plain sight. The people with the most wealth are rarely described as productive. They are described as visionary or strategic or ahead of the market. No one calls the person whose investments are quietly compounding productive. No one calls the person who built a system that runs without them productive. That word does not attach to leverage. It attaches to labor. And labor, regardless of how sophisticated or well compensated, is still a trade. What you are building right now, every choice you make about where your attention goes, what you create, what systems you put in place or fail to put in place, is either moving you toward decoupled output or keeping you excellent at the trade. There is no neutral option. Busy does not mean either. Productive locks you into one. Wealthy is what happens when you choose the other, over and over, long enough for the math to change. Down the line in this book, we turn toward an argument about rest and idleness that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how you allocate the next 10 years of your days. But right now, stay here for a moment. This is the identity shift the entire book has been moving toward. Rejecting the productive label is not laziness. It is precision. It is saying, I see the compliment for what it is and I am choosing a different target. The person who no longer needs to be called productive is not doing less. They are doing differently. They are asking, every single time they add something to their day, whether this is a trade or a build, Whether this hour disappears into output or becomes something that multiplies without them. That question is the first act of a wealth builder identity, not the investment, not the system, not the business structure. The question, because the question changes what you notice. What you notice changes what you do. And what you do over months and years is either a treadmill or a foundation. Now close the loop. The compliment you were trained to receive with pride, the most productive person I know, you never stop working, I do not know how you get so much done. That compliment, the next time you hear it, should produce something specific in you. Not pride, not shame, unease. A small, sharp, useful unease. The kind that says, I am still legible to this system. I am still operating where it can see me. And then the question that follows the unease. What would I have to build so that this compliment stops applying? That question is the door. Which room will you walk into next? Chapter 13. The busy badge is a poverty signal. You are still doing it, not always with words. It shows in the way you carry yourself when someone asks how you are. There is a particular kind of answer you have been trained to give. It comes out fast, almost proud, busy, so busy, slammed. The word leaves your mouth and for a half second something in you relaxes. Being busy means you are needed. You are moving. You are not falling behind. But here is the thing nobody around you will say out loud. That answer, the one that feels like proof of your worth, is actually the clearest signal you can send that your time is not your own. That is the tension this chapter sits inside, not whether you work hard enough. You do. The question is what that work is telling the world about your financial position. By the time this chapter ends, you will hear the words, I've been so busy, and something will shift permanently in the way you understand them. Which room will you walk into next? The room you are standing in now has a name. It is the room where your identity is built on what you do with every hour, how full your calendar runs, how many people need a piece of you. For a long time, that room felt like success. It felt earned. It felt like movement. Here is the hard truth about movement. Movement is not direction. A hamster moves constantly. So does a river current. The difference is not speed. The difference is whether you are choosing where you go or whether the structure you live inside is choosing for you. Revisit your actual circumstances at that point 3 years back as it really was. Not where you hoped to be, where you actually were. Were you busy then? Probably. Were you this busy? Close enough. Here is the mirror moment worth sitting with honestly. How much of what you built in those 3 years came from your busiest days? How much came from the decisions you made in the rare quiet moments when you actually stopped to think? Most people, when they run that calculation honestly, find the same answer. The breakthroughs came from stillness. The money came from insight. The exhaustion came from everything else. Here is an open loop worth holding. There is a specific moment in Dana's story, one you will reach before this chapter ends, that makes this concrete in a way that arguments alone never quite do. Stay with it. Dana ran a marketing consultancy for 6 years. She billed by the hour, filled her calendar the way a careful person fills a glass, right to the rim without spilling. She talked about her schedule the way some people talk about a second job they had no choice but to take. At dinner parties, when someone asked how she was doing, she answered the same way every time. Slammed. She said it with a small, tired smile that people seemed to respect. Her peers nodded. They understood. They were slammed too. Being slammed was the shared language of people who were serious about their careers. One evening, her client Renata sat across from her at a coffee shop and mentioned, almost as an aside, that she had taken a 2-week trip to Portugal the month before. Dana did a fast calculation. 2 weeks away meant 2 weeks of zero billing. She asked, carefully, whether Renata had lost a lot of ground while she was gone. Renata looked genuinely puzzled. The question didn't make sense to her. While she was in Lisbon, her content platform had run, her licensing deals had paid out, and 2 new clients had signed automatically through a funnel her assistant managed. She came back to more money than when she left. Dana sat with that for a long time after the coffee went cold. She did not immediately change anything. But the next time someone at a networking event asked how she was doing, she stopped before the word came out. She felt it there. That automatic reflex, the comfortable armor of being busy. For the first time she recognized it for what it was, not a badge. A cage she was welcoming people to see her locked inside. The word Renata used when talking about her trip was not busy. Renata talked about what her systems were doing. Her team, her processes, her recurring revenue. She spoke about her work the way a farmer talks about well-planted fields. Not frantic, tended. That distinction matters more than almost anything you will encounter in the financial self-education space. Wealthy people do not brag about being busy. They brag, when they brag at all, about systems working without them. They talk about what ran while they slept, what closed while they were traveling, what compounded while they were present for a child's school play. Their pride is structural, not hourly. Your pride, if you grew up in the same cultural water most people did, was built around the opposite: hours visible, effort demonstrated, sacrifice worn openly. The busy badge was real currency in that world. In your family, in your first job, in the social circles where you earned respect. You did not invent the equation. You inherited it, but inherited equations can be rewritten. The leverage gap, the distance between where you are and where someone like Renata operates, is not primarily a money gap or a skill gap. It is an identity gap. You still see busyness as a signal of seriousness. As long as you do, you will keep filling your hours to prove your worth. A full schedule feels like evidence that you matter. The tragedy is not that you are lazy. The tragedy is the opposite. You are too willing to be consumed. Consider what gets sacrificed in that consumption. Not just time in the abstract sense. Specific things. The mental space to spot an opportunity that arrives quietly. The energy to negotiate better terms instead of accepting the first offer because you are too tired to push. The presence of mind to notice when a small system you built is starting to work and could be expanded, rather than letting it sit while you handle the next urgent thing. Busy people miss these moments constantly, not because they are not smart enough to see them, because they are not available when the moments arrive. Here is what rewriting the identity actually looks like in practice. It does not start with quitting your job or building a passive income stream overnight. It starts with your mouth. Specifically, with how you answer the question everyone asks. When someone says, "How have you been?" you stop reaching for busy as the first word. You find something else, something more honest to where you want to go. You say something like, "I have been working on something interesting," or "Things have been moving." You remove the busyness from the headline. Not to perform a different identity, but to stop reinforcing the old one every time you open your mouth. Language is not just description. Language is rehearsal. Every time you say, "I am so busy," you are rehearsing the belief that your worth comes from being consumed. Every time you stop yourself and say something different, you are rehearsing a different relationship with your own time. Dana's final scene in this story is not dramatic. She is at a work lunch about 8 months after the coffee with Renata. Someone across the table asks her how things have been. She takes a breath. 3 words do not come out of her mouth. She stops, and then she answers differently. She says, honestly, that things have been good, that she is working on restructuring how she delivers her services so they work better for clients whether she is in the room or not. 3 months later, she raises her rates. She builds out a small group program that runs on a recorded curriculum. She bills the same monthly revenue in 12 hours of direct client contact that she used to bill in 40. She is not rich yet, but she is no longer performing poverty. The busy badge was always a poverty signal. You just did not have the translation before. Now you do. What does the word you reach for say about the cage you are standing in? Chapter 14. Build one thing that outlives your effort. Every civilization that has left a trace behind it understood something most individuals within it did not. Across every era, in every language, on every continent where people gathered and built and passed things down, there existed a small group who created things that kept working after the creator stopped working. Not because they were rare geniuses, not because fortune singled them out, but because they understood a distinction the majority around them never stopped to examine. They built things. While others traded their hours, these people constructed vessels that held effort and then multiplied it without requiring more effort to pour in. The pattern is ancient, and it is available to you right now today in the particular shape of your particular life. You are at the end of this book, which means you are exactly at the beginning of what this book was always pointing toward. That word you reach for, the one the previous chapter left hanging in the air. When someone asks how you are doing and you open your mouth, what comes out? Is it a report of your schedule? A list of everything demanding your attention? A quiet pride in being needed by too many things at once? That word, whatever it is, describes your current relationship with time. And this chapter is going to ask you to change that relationship permanently. Not through motivation, through one specific decision you can make before this week ends. This is something to stay with for a second, for a moment. Think about the last 3 years of your life. Count the hours you spent being genuinely productive, completing tasks, meeting deadlines, finishing projects, staying late, waking early, grinding through the list. Now ask yourself one honest question. What do you own today that you did not own 3 years ago that works for you while you sleep? Not a credential, not a reputation for reliability, something that generates value independent of your continued presence in front of it. For most people who have been running hard for years, the answer is uncomfortable. The hours were real. The effort was real. The financial distance traveled is smaller than it should be. That is not a failure of character. It is a failure of architecture. You were building a structure with no foundation for leverage. Every brick you laid required you to lay the next brick. Remove you from the equation and the whole thing stops. That is not wealth. That is an elaborate way of selling your time in increments, dressed up to feel like progress. There is a woman named Celeste who ran a boutique marketing consultancy for 11 years. She was exceptional at her work. Clients renewed. Referrals came steadily. Her hourly rate climbed every 2 years like clockwork. By any external measure, she was succeeding. She worked 60 hours a week and earned well. But at 41, she had a slow week, not a bad week, just slow, and her income dropped by 60% in a single month. She had not taken a vacation in 4 years. Every week she was absent was a week she did not earn. The consultancy was not a business. It was a job she had constructed around herself with no exits and no floor. What Celeste had built was impressive. What Celeste had built would not outlive a single month of her own absence. She understood this on a Tuesday afternoon in October, sitting with a cup of coffee going cold, doing the math on what she actually owned versus what she had simply operated. That Tuesday changed how she spent the following 18 months. Not her effort level, her effort target. She stopped taking on new consulting clients. She started turning the framework she had spent a decade developing into a course that could sell while she slept. It took 8 months to build properly. There were weeks when the old work felt more urgent, when client calls seemed more real than the slow construction of something that did not yet exist. But she kept building the thing that would outlive her effort. 2 years later, that course generated more in a month than her consultancy had generated in a quarter. Celeste still consults. She works 20 hours a week. She chooses her clients instead of needing them. The difference was not talent. She had always had the talent. The difference was what she aimed the talent at. Now here is the open loop this chapter planted at the start, and here is where it closes. You asked what your word says about the cage you are standing in. The answer is this. The word reveals your current identity. And identity determines action far more reliably than intention does. If you still identify primarily as a hard worker, you will continue to optimize for working hard. The cage is not external. It is the story you tell about what makes you valuable. And you can change that story. Not with affirmations, not with visualizations, with one concrete act of construction aimed at something that does not require your continuous presence to keep producing. Wealth is not the reward that comes after enough years of productivity. That is the story that kept you in the cycle. Wealth is what happens when you stop trading hours for worth and start replacing that trade with ownership, one asset at a time. An asset can be a digital product, a rental unit, a piece of intellectual property, a system that serves customers without you in the room, a fund that compounds while you do other things. The category matters less than the question. Will this still be working in 5 years if I stop showing up every day? Most people never build the first one because the first one is the hardest and the least immediately rewarding. The consulting call pays today. The course pays in 8 months, maybe 12. The hourly work feels real because the money is instant. The asset feels abstract because the payoff is deferred. But here is what is also deferred and almost never accounted for: the cost of never building it. Every year you spend without a single leverage vehicle is a year the gap between your effort and your wealth widens invisibly. You do not see the cost on any invoice. You only feel it when you do the math on a slow Tuesday in October. This is the initiation point, not the end of learning, not the graduation, the beginning of building with different materials toward a different structure. You have spent this entire book seeing the architecture of busyness clearly, naming what the busy badge actually costs, understanding the leverage gap and why the people who close it are not more talented or more disciplined than you. They simply chose a different target earlier. You can choose it now. Later is not disqualifying. Later is just later. Before you return to your task list, before you open your inbox, before you fill your calendar with activity that will feel productive and leave no asset behind, do one thing. Name the leverage vehicle you are going to build. Not someday. One that could be functional within 12 months if you gave it 10 focused hours a week instead of 10 more hours of hourly work. Name it specifically. Not a category. A thing. A real thing with a real name and a real audience that would actually pay for it. Because the question that follows you out of this book is not how do I become more productive. The question is, what are you building that will still be earning when you stop?